What's up, Call of Duty fans? Welcome back. IHOLDSHIFT with you guys, talking more franchising things as far as what potential bidders might also still be involved in trying to find secured spots for 2020. But before we get into what those potential bidders would look like, I want to talk about the CoDBurner post just in brief. If you missed it, essentially he brought the leak forward that orgs will not be keeping their names coming into 2020. So the brand names will be taken away. This is something that, again, I think most people would have expected to have seen comparatively to the Overwatch League. That didn't happen there, won't happen here. I do want to talk about one thing in specific, though, because with the branding changes, Activision essentially are the ones going to these orgs saying, here are some names that you can pick from, and here are some color schemes that you can pick from. Activision is essentially going to these teams and giving them an option. They're not allowing them to have creative identity and a creative freedom when it comes to making their names to try to make sure that the brand matches the total look of the league and all those things. My biggest problem with that is that you get what you had in Overwatch, where everyone wears the same jersey, which is boring, in my opinion. And to be honest, all of the logos look pretty much darn the same. There was an article that was posted by another graphic designer that's in logo design specifically, and poked holes in every single design that was out there for the Overwatch League and why he hates it from a branding standpoint. If I find that article again, which I believe I probably will, I'll link it in the description below. I'll probably talk more on the branding things and my little rant on it later in another video. But that's kind of the thing that I feel right now, is that having Activision Blizzard essentially pick your brands for you is super boring. It just doesn't leave any creative influence for the orgs as a whole. And I hate to say it so bluntly and so unintelligently, but it's just stupid, flat out. Like, I just wish the teams had more creative control over their look. Obviously with approval, but I wish that they had more pill there. But let's dig into the teams here. I'll talk more about the branding and all that stuff in a future video. Again, 5 teams with the appeal and goal for 12, if not more. I'm thinking that it'll probably be more like 16 with how many teams just previously bought into the Overwatch League Season 2. 8 new teams were put in after the initial 12 were there, so I wouldn't be surprised to see 16. 16 just, it makes everything so much easier as well, but that's for another conversation. Again, we went over our first 5 confirmed teams. Team Envy for Dallas, Splice with Toronto, New York Excelsior, essentially the Sterling Equities brand in New York, the Atlanta Esports Ventures, the owners of the Atlanta Reign in Atlanta, and then Paris by DM Esports or Contact Gaming, whatever, the Paris Eternal owners for Paris. So those are the first 5 cities with the potential of 7 more. Let's talk current CWL orgs that might be interested in getting involved, because that's where a lot of our attention is. I'm going to start things off with OpTic. This was a fairly, initially at least, a fairly obvious and expected bid, as they're the largest Call of Duty org out there and have already bought into the Houston Outlaws in the Overwatch League. However, there's been a lot of wrestling in the wind about Immortals looking to make a majority bid into Infinite Esports Entertainment, which is OpTic's parent company. It went up for sale back in January and has come a little bit slower building, as it was, I think it was like $150 million buyout is what they were looking for. But it's been coming to the forefront of League of Legends conversations, as Immortals might be trying to buy out the OpTic spot there in specific. We'll talk more on this later about Immortals, but for OpTic, it would be, I think, a damn shame to not see them involved. But if they're selling their parent company, there's really not much you can do about it at that point. The next thing I want to talk about is 100 Thieves. You really can't see Nadeshot's brainchild passing up on the opportunity, especially since they've already invested so much into not only the Call of Duty team, but also the League of Legends squad in the NALCS. Based out of LA, this very well could be the SoCal-based team, and honestly, is probably one of the only orgs that might get past a namesake brand. Like the Los Angeles Thieves could be really, really dope. It just comes down to, do you want to assimilate a town that's majorly assimilated with crime into being the Los Angeles Thieves? Biggest question comes to the rumor of that $60 million spot as well. That's currently apparently the bid for LA, and if 100 Thieves will even make a go at such a hefty price. The next team, the third spot I want to talk about, is GEN.G. One of the biggest earning esports organizations in the world. It's the newest addition to the Call of Duty scene as an organization based out of Seoul, South Korea. You'd expect that with the move barging into the Call of Duty scene, that they're trying to gain some notice and see if this would work out for them. Also, being the investors behind the Seoul Dynasty, you'd expect them to utilize Seoul as their geolocation. The biggest question comes down to, would this actually favor a Korean market? We've never really seen Korean teams in Call of Duty. The only thing we've seen out of the East really has come from Japan and Australia. Nothing from South Korea. So would that market even be favorable to a brand whatsoever for GEN.G to actually invest in? The next team coming up, again, controversy around it with FaZe Clan. With the recent push to get back into the CWL, having secured the Red Reserve slot, things looked like a certainty that FaZe would also bid in for the 2020 franchises. However, some things have happened that made me think otherwise. Whispers and rumors are starting to tell us that, in fact, that might not be the case at all, that FaZe is not interested in bidding, period. And to be honest, I'm not exactly surprised since their CWL return, and apparently they sold off all of those contracts that were on loan in Attach, Priesta, and Crowder. Again, remember back to the PLQ right afterwards, all those players went out on loan, which made me think that their contracts were still being paid by FaZe, but just being marginally bought out. It looks like they may have sold those contracts off completely. And if they have sold off those major contracts, it might be a nod to the fact that there is no actual interest in the bid, and they're just going to continue their avenue of esports pursuits through their content creation on YouTube. They're a very successful Fortnite pull, but also obviously CSGO at all. It'd be interesting, but I think not having Attach, Priesta, and Crowder and giving away those contracts or selling away those contracts maybe at a lower price, and only having Zuma, who's a major contract holder, but selling him who's likely not, maybe FaZe is just kind of liquidating their assets a bit and moving on with what they have in Fortnite and things of that nature. It would be a shame, but it's very possible, people, so brace yourselves for it. Next team up, LUMINOSITY. I feel like people forget that LUMINOSITY has some considerable pull in the esports scene. Although they aren't very represented in very big esports titles, they are the primary managers of the Vancouver Titans Overwatch League team, and even though the org itself is based out of Toronto, there is a lot of pull with Rogers and all the entertainment that's up there in Vancouver. It just comes down to if LUMINOSITY will start to kind of pull on those chains like, hey, this is happening, we have a pretty decent team, would you buy into a Call of Duty spot? That seems to be what would be the likely case scenario to get Rogers involved with possibly buying into a Vancouver-based Call of Duty team, or at least somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. My sixth team up is EUNITED, and some conversation has developed that they probably wouldn't be able to afford or even be interested in franchising at all, but I still wouldn't be surprised if EU didn't make a go for it. The only thing is that Call of Duty is their only real success story, so if they get rid of Call of Duty, they're going to be left with the League of Legends team that only lasted a year and their current Smite team. Lol. But this would probably be the first big chance for them to actually enter into what was a tier 1 esports scene and an esports stage. Really, since their Cinderella run since IW, the Call of Duty scene has been the biggest thwarting pressure behind EUNITED's brand. The biggest question would be, can they A, afford it, but B, where would they actually locate themselves? Their Twitter has them located in LA, but there's no way that they can afford the $60 million bid or would be interested in that in the first place. Next up, I've got Evil Geniuses. Most people obviously should know EG, not only from their current CWL team, but most impacting their COD Champs run from last year. But don't forget that this org also has a major identity currently in Dota, but also from their previous experience in StarCraft, and more recently, the success they found in the FGC. They're based out of San Francisco, and I would expect to see an investment bid at least thrown into the CWL by EG, but I don't know if they would identify with San Francisco, considering that the San Francisco Shock are currently owned by NRG. Next up, I've got Reciprocity. Obviously, having just moved their team out to Vegas and having a team house, you would think that that would be the first of many starts when it comes to basing their team in the United States. Personally, I would assume they have the money to support the COD franchising bid, considering the success of not only their COD team, but more specifically, their PUBG, their Halo, and their Rainbow Six Siege squads. The biggest question is, where do you identify with? Do you do it in Vegas? Do you do it in Canada, which is where Reciprocity's home base is technically located? Or do you try to identify in the United Kingdom, since this team has a major identity in the English Isles? Next up, Heretics. Don't be surprised. They're backed by Kentucky Fried Chicken. It sounds so weird to say, but if they do well enough this season, which currently they are, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Spanish and the Iberian Peninsula get a localized franchise team if they're able to pull on the Colonel's pockets a little bit to say, hey, we're finding some success here. We've got a big fan base. They're buying a bunch of our merchandising. Would you be interested in throwing in a $25 million bid out of somewhere in Spain? Wouldn't be surprised. I don't think you should be either. The Niles next up, and this would be a surprise, I think. The biggest question comes down to, do they have the money? The question mark at the end of that sentence is massive. And even if they end up having enough money, if they go for a bid, where do you identify with? This team and this organization has gone through a lot of structural changes. I just don't know if they have the infrastructure to make it happen. Past that, though, I really can't see orgs like Midnight, Elevate, Accelerate from the past, UYU, Enigma 6, or the previous Red Reserve, obviously, being able to rationalize the monster investment for smaller orgs like them to get a bid spot. Let's be real, I can't really see an instance where CWL even allows Midnight to even get a chance to buy in, especially after how terribly mismanaged that whole first roster change period went. Let's switch conversation to, again, current Call of Duty orgs, but orgs that are not in the CWL this year. Starting off with G2 Esports. It was a pretty big shock and a massive disappointment that G2 didn't make the league after they were obviously kind of in a folly of a bracket run in the PLQ. But every indication would be that G2 would be interested in at least putting forward a bid for 2020 after buying into the EU LCS. It's interesting, though, because this is a Spanish-owned esports organization that's based out of Berlin, Germany. So who knows what will happen there, but with their interest in franchising and League of Legends, I wouldn't be surprised with their kind of thrust into the scene in the early parts of this year to be interested in putting together a bid for 2020. Next up, I got the Pittsburgh Knights. I think this would be more of a stretch, but not nearly as big of a stretch as like Denial would be, and not because of the lack of money. They're backed by the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it's unclear exactly how much that backing is actually being used in a financial department or if it's just a promotional department. They aren't currently supporting a Call of Duty team, not through Fort Worth, not through London, and not currently at all. And you would think that they would have attempted to pick somebody up for either of those major events. For me, it just kind of comes down to, will the Pittsburgh Knights try to pick up a team come for the Open Division playoffs that will be happening during the finals and potentially for World Championships? If they get back involved then, maybe they start to get back involved with franchising. Next up, MOVISTAR Riders. Don't be surprised. They were down to the wire in the conversation for one of the EU LCS spots for the 2019 season just before the negotiations fell through and they were in turn not selected to be represented. But still, they sustained teams in League of Legends, Counter-Strike Go, Rainbow Six Siege, as well as their current Call of Duty roster, which has done well at the open events. I wouldn't be surprised to see them throw out a bid, but the biggest question is, would they be able to go up against a team like Heretics and KFC when it comes to priority? They are a monster Spanish telephone operator, so I would not be surprised that they would have the money to at least throw a bid out there if they were interested. More of a stretch down the road here, I got Vodafone Giants. Even though Movistar owns 65% of the Spanish telecommunications market, Vodafone has aggressively been trying to get involved, and I wouldn't be surprised to see, again, at least a proposal bid coming out of Vodafone, either seeing as they currently support a League of Legends and a Rainbow Six team, alongside, again, their current Call of Duty roster, which still participates at Opens. And then last up in this current Call of Duty, not CWL franchises, is the MINDFREAK out of Australia. Their co-owner Albert Naked Nassif went on Twitter and posted saying, hey, the Melbourne MINDFREAK sounds kind of nice. And honestly, it's probably not out of the realm of possibility, seeing as MINDFREAK currently has notable teams in the Gears, Halo, Rainbow Six Siege, and Overwatch contenders scene. So with MINDFREAK having good performances at the last two Opens, and they continue to compete through Worlds, this could be an opportunity potentially to get Australia represented, and it would be really interesting to see that happen if they do end up having the money to buy in the first place. How about previous Call of Duty organizations that are no longer represented in 2019, but might still have potential interest? I'll try to list these out from most likely to least likely on the interest scale, starting with Cloud9. Most of us remember the rosters of old that represented Cloud9 in the BO3 and IW days. It's kind of hard not to, when most of the former players are huge names in today's title, including players like Assault, Aches, Priesta, Silly, Accuracy, and many, 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 many more. I think that this is expected for 2020 since Cloud9 has not only invested into the NALCS, but is also a partner and owner of the Overwatch League team from London, the London Spitfire. The question becomes, if they do buy in, will this be the new face of London Call of Duty as they currently are in Overwatch? The next team up, I've got Team Liquid up here. Their initial stint in Call of Duty was a little bit short-lived back in 2016, but there were rumors that they were potentially looking into Spacely's team after Vegas and the PLQ, but none of those rumors were ever really fully confirmed. However, having bought previously into a major part of the NALCS scene, but obviously having a very good Counter-Strike team, probably the best, and one of the best in the world, if not the best, period, it wouldn't be super surprising to see a bid come out from Team Liquid. The biggest thing that would dissuade them away, I think, would be the simple fact that they cannot keep the Team Liquid brand. I think that's kind of probably more important to them at this stage. Team KALIBER's up next. They were on a podcast earlier this year talking about the appeal of franchising in Call of Duty and how this could potentially help their brand. But beyond having some Fortnite players, the org has been extremely quiet since Champs last year. And again, I think the branding thing might dissuade them just a touch. Just below that, CounterLogic Gaming, another League of Legends investors, this time on the North American side. The former BO3 org has had stakes in Halo and Rainbow Six Siege. The biggest financial backer of this organization is actually that owns the Madison Square Garden Company, the lead owners of just about every major New York team, including the Knicks and the Rangers. So it's potential that we could possibly see CounterLogic making a potential pushback here. But again, with Sterling Equities being involved in New York, that makes it a little bit less likely that they would be the team to pick up. Echo Fox I have listed more as a formality here. Again, an NALCS franchise with a history in Call of Duty, dating as recently back to their last year performance where they finished top 24 at Champs. It wasn't too much of a surprise to see them pull out from this year, considering that Rick has taken a step back. It just comes down to, will they actually make a bid into the Call of Duty scene with their new partners that are at the helm? I would think probably not so much, as Echo Fox is kind of going through a whole new phase of identity, but it's not out of the realm of possibility since they have participated in Call of Duty previously, so they have some experience here. Ghost Gaming I have up next, and mostly because I love their logo, but they found tons of success in picking up individuals from Fortnite and still hold a solid team in Rocket League after their decent success that they encountered from World War II. I think it was a surprise that we didn't see Ghost back for the 2019 season, and that might indicate that they're not as interested in Call of Duty nearly as much as they previously were. The biggest question mark comes down to, will they think this investment would be worth it for the CWL in 2020? Much less likely here, Vitality. Now that DM Esports has bought into Paris, you figured that the French-based organization would likely not be putting in a bid, but again, with the unsexy history they have in Call of Duty, but they also having a spot in the EU LCS, they have experience in both departments in franchising and Call of Duty, and they also hold claim on some successful Rainbow Six Siege and Counter-Strike Go teams. We potentially could still see a bid, but with France being occupied by DM Esports, you don't see an instance where they would actually make a full-on go. Rogue is my last team listed here, as they found some minimal success back in the past with Call of Duty and were another addition to the EU LCS, in which they are currently not doing so well. However, they just announced that they are no longer supporting a CSGO team any longer, so who knows what the spending plan is for Rogue and the esports org there. Finish things off here, I've got outside organizations that are currently not participating in Call of Duty but are likely bidders. These are probably the most likely that we'll see coming in the future. First and foremost, I have the Philadelphia Comcast Spectacor Group. They're buying into the Philadelphia Fusion, and their news of their upcoming massively cool esports arena in Philadelphia seems to be the gas pedal is down to full throttle for Comcast wanting to get involved with esports, and city-based franchising makes it that much more appealing. With no true esports branding in the past, it's a very fresh slate for Philadelphia to get involved. The biggest question mark is, if they do buy in, do you still call that Fusion Stadium the Fusion Esports Arena? Because obviously we're learning that you cannot have the Philadelphia Fusion be represented in Overwatch, but also in Call of Duty. So who knows what happens with the stadium if it gets changed to something different. But regardless, I think we'd likely see a bid coming out of Comcast for a Philadelphia spot. Next up, I've got Energy Esports, obviously currently the team behind the San Francisco Shock. Co-owner Andy Miller is also the co-owner of the Sacramento Kings, and partnership owners also include that of Shaq, J-Lo, and this org itself has been a name at the forefront of games like League of Legends, Overwatch, Rocket League, and CSGO. More importantly, though, Miller has recently spoke out with journalists about the prospects of adding another franchise esport into the mix of already running a successful business, as well as owning and operating the San Francisco Shock, and he initially said that it would be a crazy amount of money, and he thinks that running 3 brands would essentially be impossible. However, he also made comments in that same article seeming like he was at least marginally interested in getting involved, so who knows if NRG will be represented. San Francisco very well could have a team here as well, though. The KRAFT Group, again, the identity behind the Boston Uprising. Robert Kraft has made himself most famous for his claim on the New England Patriots and is wildly interested when city-based franchising was announced with the Overwatch League, hence the purchase of the Boston Uprising. The Uprising was his first esports move, but the appeal of managing it like traditional sports was definitely where the appeal to get involved came from. He loves the idea of city branding, salaries, and things like that to kind of build an actual foundation rather than just going out and trying to make it happen. Next up, I've got MISFITS Gaming, having bought into the EU LCS as well as the Florida Mayhem from Overwatch League. The next step, if they were to continue on, would be to find a way into Call of Duty. They are a UK-based organization, so that again points to potentially maybe some interest in the UK spot. The question becomes, how will they likely think if it's even worth it in the first place, as they've recently dropped their CSGO, Heroes of the Storm, and Hearthstone teams. Now, let's talk Immortals, as this is one of my last teams here. Again, they own the LA Valiant, they own the CSGO team made in Brazil, and Immortals also competes in Dota 2, while also being a former competitor in the NALCS. The org has a lot of interest in pushing their esports envelope forward, as they will also be holding the homestand during Stage 4 of the Overwatch League in the name of the LA Valiant. The org's investors include stakes all over LA, including the Lakers, the Kings, and the Galaxy, and recently, Immortals founder Noah Winston did take a step back to a managerial role to open up space for the CEO Ari Segal to kind of gain the limelight when it comes to making more business opportunities. This is where things get in controversy with the whole OpTic thing. They recently just completed a $30 million funding run where the Immortals will be looking to acquire part, if not a full stake, in Infinite Esports Entertainment. Again, the company behind OpTic Gaming and that brand. And as well, on top of that, the Houston Outlaws. Now, the only difference would be if Immortals do get this partnership stake, they would have to drop their Houston Outlaws team to somebody else, considering they own the LA Valiant. You cannot have both. It just comes down to if the bid does get accepted by Infinite Esports, that would be the go call for Immortals to also purchase a Call of Duty spot, because likely they would get the contracts that are currently in place with Scump, Dashy, and all those guys. Now, don't freak out here. This is an ownership change. Hex will likely still be involved in some fashion as the OpTic brand manager. You'd figure that Immortals would not just get rid of OpTic. It's just that OpTic would be owned by a different partner than the Infinite Esports Entertainment. This is all speculation, so don't freak out that, oh, if OpTic gets bought out, everything's going to change. Nothing might change. Ownership changes happen all the time in traditional sports, and nothing changes with the player contracts and things of that nature. So don't freak out yet about losing your favorite players on a major team. It just comes down to if the bid actually ends up happening or not. I was going to finish the video long-winded. I'm going to get off this one. I will be doing another video though coming up with more talking about branding and what kind of things I would like to see change from Overwatch League to Call of Duty. And I'll put a link to that article in the description below as well for you. Keep an eye out for random uploads for recasts going over CWL London games off Charlie and Delta, and more content coming up for the upcoming regular season week of the CWL at the end of the week. Till next time, hope you keep holding it down. So long.